Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back here with the third episode of my brand new React course. Last episode, we just went over some of the basic stuff like JSX, components, and props. And in this video, we're gonna work on top of those skills, but also at the same time introducing new concepts. So in this video, we're gonna first talk about how to use CSS in React. It's pretty simple, but I just wanted to get that out of the way because some people get really confused and I don't want you guys to get blocked by it if you're trying to do stuff on your own. So I'm just going to go over really quick how to do that. I'm also going to be talking about conditional rendering in React, which is extremely important, and will start to give you an idea of how cool React really is. And I'm also going to talk about how lists can be used to reduce code in React. So those three topics are really cool, really interesting. Those will definitely set you up to do a lot of stuff in React, and that's the whole point of this video. So with that in mind, let's get into the tutorial. Okay everyone, so to start off this episode, I'm going to first talk about how to implement CSS inside of React. And the reason why I even want to mention this and not just let it slide and assume you can figure it out on your own is because for some reason I've dealt with this. When I started, this was something that annoyed me and it took me like 30 or 40 minutes to figure it out for some reason. So for that reason, I just wanted to talk about it a little bit and explain to you guys how you do it. So basically, it's not that different at all. An example I have over here is we have this, I just have my name Pedro being displayed, and over here we have a header tag, an h1 tag, displaying my name Pedro, right? But there's a class name which is equal to name. So what I want to explain to you guys is at the top by default, it comes with an app.css, right? I mentioned to you guys that this comes by default, right? And it already has some styling to it because if you look at what we've been doing so far, it's all been centered, which is not how a website is by default. So this is how it looks by default when you install using the create React app command. So this file over here, you can simply just add any CSS as you want. I could just come over here and say .name and for example, make the color of the text be red. And since we are importing over here, it will work. And you'll see that now it's red. So the only thing I wanted with this is to show you guys that whenever you have a CSS file, you can just import it like this. By saying import, you don't give it a name. You just import and put the path to where that file is. Now, there is something important I wanted to tell you guys as well. There is something called CSS Modules, which is a different way to write your CSS. So if you came over here and changed the name of this file from app.css to app.module.css, what this will do is it will make this file into a CSS module style sheet. So what exactly does that mean? It means that when I import, instead of importing this way, I can actually import it by saying import styles from app.modules or module.css, and then instead of declaring the strings for the class names, for example saying app or name directly over here, what I can do is I can treat them like objects. I could just say styles.app like this, then say something like styles.name. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, it's kind of annoying to have strings all over your website or your code. So maybe if you prefer to do something like this, it's fine. I'm actually not going to do it this way, although a lot of people do it this way. You see that it still works, even though we're doing it this method. So you can see it works. I'll just follow the normal way you use CSS because it's what I'm used to. And but I just wanted to point this out because a lot of people see this as well when they're coding in React. So this is the basics of how to use CSS in React. Now let's get into some more interesting stuff, such as how to conditionally render in React. Okay, so let's start talking about conditional rendering in React. So like I mentioned when I started this course, I'm assuming you know some stuff from JavaScript, but I'll just do a really quick recap on the ternary operator, which is a concept in JavaScript which allows you to write if statements without actually writing if statements, right? So you know if statements are used for conditionals when you say something like if this, then that. But there's a shorthand notation which is way more useful when you have situations where you don't like want to use multiple lines. So this is an example that just demonstrates what can be done. So for example, imagine we have a variable called age, and we want to console log the text is over age if it is over 18, and console log is under age if it is under 18. Well, if we're using an if-else statement, we do it this way. But we could use, instead of this, just a ternary operator and say something like if age is greater than or equal to 18, then we want to console log the text, right? I'll just write whatever here. But else, we want to console log something else, right? Now, I'm not going to finish writing this because it's redundant, but you can see that this serves as an if and this serves as an else. And this is really important. There's also the double ampersand, which serves as kind of like, if something is true, then do this, right? And I'm not gonna go too much in depth about this because this is something that you should have learned in JavaScript, but it will be super important when you're working with React. And I'll show you guys exactly why that is important. If we have some text over here where we want to display based on some sort of condition, we can do that very easily by using conditional rendering. So the most simplest way to conditionally render in React is by actually having an if statement. For example, if I create this variable called age over here, like I mentioned, and set it equal to 15, I can just come over here and say if age is greater than or equal to 18, then return an h1 tag. I'll just make an h1 tag, a header tag that says over age. And if it's under 18, I want to say under age, right? Now it's 15, so you can see it will say over age. And then else, over here, else, we just return whatever is down here, and we say that the person is under age, right? You'll see that by this logic, it should be displaying that the person is under age. But if we change this to 19, which is obviously over age, it will now say over age. So you can see we are conditionally changing what the UI is being shown depending on some sort of condition, which is in this case, if the number 19 is greater than the number 18. Now, like I said, ternary operators can make this look way better because we're currently having an if statement. If statements aren't bad in itself, right? If you're going to use an if statement, I wouldn't even put an else over here. I would just do something like this because it's still, since you're returning something, it will still work the same way. But in this case, I would much rather do something different. I would just remove this over here, and down here, directly inside of one return statement, I would just put some JavaScript code using ternary operators that will display the different pieces of information. For example, I can come over here and say if age is greater than or equal to 18, then I want to display an h1 tag that says over age, right? But else, if it's not, if this condition is false, then I want to display something else. I want to display another h1 tag that says under age. And you'll see that in a single line, we're able to do the same thing that we were doing with all of those lines before. And because of how React mixes your JavaScript logic with how your UI is being displayed, this works perfectly, right? It says over age because 19 is over age, but if I put 17, now it will say under age. Like I said, there's other ways in which you can conditionally render stuff. For example, you can use a double ampersand, which is just an if statement, not an if-else statement. And an example for that would be if we had some sort of actual Boolean here. Let me say something like is green. And this is actually a good example because this example will show you guys another way to use CSS in React that I didn't mention in the previous segment of this video. In this example, think of this is green as a Boolean that starts that is false. But if it is true, then it will make the text being displayed become green, right? So that's the whole point of it. If it's not, then the text will remain the same. So how could we do something like this? And which text are we talking about? Well, I'm going to create a text over here, which is going to say something like, this has color. It's just a random text, but you can see that it will always appear no matter what down over here. And if we want to add some sort of styling to it, we can either add it by using the CSS file like I mentioned previously in this video, or you can actually directly add some styles to your individual elements. Now, styling like this, inline styling like this, already exists in normal HTML. However, the difference here is that you're actually going to be using objects to do something like this. So it's a bit different. So the way we do it is we declare a style property into whatever HTML or JSX element we're going to be altering the style for. And then over here, we just put another curly brace because it is an object. And what we put over here is all the different styles we want to add to this element. We can add, for example, color, and it already has autocomplete for us, which is amazing, right? There's like so many things we can add to style this element, but in our case, we only want color. I also want to point out that in normal CSS, like over here, if I want to say color red, I can just say color red, but since this is JavaScript, it's not actual CSS that we're writing inside of this object. If I want to say color red, I have to put red inside of a string, right? I'm just pointing this out because it's small things that can confuse you if you're working on your own, and I just want to point them out now so that you don't make the mistake whenever you're working on your own. Now, another thing I want to point out is that when you have some sort of style that includes a hyphen, so like something like background color, instead of saying background hyphen color, you gotta say background color like this, right? So that's basically it for inline styling. The only style that we want to know over here is the color one, which is we set by default to be red, and you can see it displays the color red. Now, what I want to show you guys is how do we integrate this Boolean to be part of this color definition, right? How can we say that if isGreen is true, then make this color green, but if green is false, make it red? Well, by just using the ternary operator that we created over here, we can just do something like this. If isGreen is true, then we make this green. But if it's false, we make it red. You see, this one line logic over here can have great impact on how your website can look like. So right now it's red, but if we turn this to true, now it will be green, right? And this is really cool because later on you'll see how we can use this kind of logic to make your website look really cool and not actually be manually altering what the value of this variable looks like. So this is basically it for conditionals. Like I said, you can use the double ampersand to just do an if statement instead of an if else. An example would be saying like is green over here, and if is green, then I want to just display, I don't know, a button, right? A button that says something like this is a button. Now this example is kind of dumb, but all this is doing is it's showing you that this is an if statement. If is green is true, then we show the button, but if we set it to false, then we don't show the button, right? So I'm just showing you guys some very simple logic that you can integrate into your projects, and that will be really useful later on. Now, what we're going to talk next in this video is about how to use lists in React. The reason why I want to mention this specifically is because lists are extremely important in a complex website, especially websites that you use React to create. We're going to be using them so much throughout this course that I really need to already point you guys in the right direction so you guys already start getting used to it. So let's start working with lists right now. So in order to work with lists or arrays in React, I just came up with this really quick example over here, which we're going to be working with throughout this next part of this video. So I created an array called names, and the array is just an array of strings where it just includes name of people, which just includes names of people, right? So we have Pedro, Jake, Jessica, Mike, and Dustin. So what I want to do is I want to display the name of each of those people in a very easy way without having to repeatedly write each of those names, right? For example, if I'm being lazy in some sense, I could just come over here, write an h1 tag, and I could just say, for example, that I want to display the first element in the names array, right? By saying something like names 0. And you'll see that this works. It definitely works. It says Pedro. If I do names1, it will show Jake, as you can see over here, and so on, right? However, I don't really want to display each of them like this, like putting each of them individually, because that's stupid. That would take forever, especially if it is a big array. What I want to do is I want to use this array and tell it, basically say that we want to loop through this whole array, and for each of those elements, I want to display something else. Now, this is where I assume you know some of JavaScript as well. The basic stuff that I assume is that you know some of the JavaScript array functions. So we have some functions. For example, we have for each, right? You can say something like names.forEach, and that serves to loop through each element and, I don't know, do something for each of those elements. We also have map, we have filter, we have reduce. We have so many different functions that you can use with arrays. I would definitely recommend practicing or learning at least some of them because they're going to be really important. One of the most important ones for us in React is the map function. Why exactly is the map function important? Well, because with the map function, you grab an array, and for each of those elements, you can change a part of it, right? You can change something in each of those elements. And why is that important? Because if we want to display each of those elements in some sort of UI form inside of our project, we can very easily do that by just coming over here and saying names, then .map, and the map function, it requires that you pass over here a callback function. So a callback function is just an anonymous function like this, a function that has no name, that exists as a return, like as an action after you call this map function. You can grab a value and a key, right? The key is just, for example, the index of each of the elements. So for this element, the key will be 0. For this one, it will be 1, right? It's just the index in the array. The value is the actual value of it, right? So for the first element, the value will be Pedro. The second one, it will be Jake. The third one will be Jessica. Obviously, we're not going to call it value and key. You can actually call it key if you want to. But what I'm going to call this over here is name. And just to make it make sense with the data that we're working with. And what I want to do is for each of the elements in this array, I want to return some sort of HTML or some sort of JSX. And I want to return an h1 tag, which means that it's going to loop through each of these elements, and for each of the elements, it's going to create an independent h1 tag. Now, what I want to display inside of this h1 tag? Well, I want to display the name, right? I want to display whatever is over here. Now, never forget that whenever you're inside two JSX or HTML tags, you always have to use curly braces to declare your JavaScript. And also, one thing that is kind of annoying with React is the fact that whenever you're looping like this, it will always require that you use the key in some way or another. So what you can do is you can just pass this key property over here to remove an annoying warning that always comes with React. It's not important for you to know why you have to do this right now. And trust me when I say it's not important for you to know, it's just it will take unnecessary space in your brain when you're learning so many things in the beginning. So just know that to remove that warning, you can put this over here. You can also not do anything with this key at all, and it should be fine as well. But the important thing is that now, if you come over here, we are displaying each of the elements in our screen, which is amazing, right? If I add another person over here, for example, Lucas, it should now display Lucas as well inside of our website. So this is the basics of actually looping through an array. Now, what are some more complicated ways you can do something like this? Well, usually when you're working with data, you work with objects, right? And objects can exist inside of arrays. For example, if you have a list of users that you get from some sort of database, it's going to be a list of objects, right? So I'm going to create an example over here where we have information about each of the users, and we just want to display those information for each of the users inside of our website. So I'll be back in a second. Okay, everyone. So to make it simple, I removed half of the people in the list and I only kept 3 of them, so we can just work with 3 of them. And I created for each of them an object that only contains 2 different fields, a name and an age, right? So this is a list of users, as you can see. And this example is really cool because you guys will see how easy it is to work with objects inside of arrays in React. So what I want to do is I want to loop through each of these users, and I want to display a div that includes a name and an age. So to do that, we can do the exact same thing as we did before. Obviously, our array has a different name now, so we'll change to users instead of names. And instead of returning an h1 tag, we're going to return a div tag, right? Because it will include multiple pieces of information. Also, I need to change this name variable over here to user because it makes more sense, right? We're not just displaying a name in each element in the array. Now we have an object containing two different pieces of information about the user. So could we just do something like this and just display the user info like this? No, it will break. Actually, it won't display absolutely anything because user is an object and not a string like it was before. So if we want to display both the name and the age, I would have to do something like user.name and user.age. And you'll see that now what it's doing is it's actually returning the correct information in our screen. Now, one cool thing that we can do is instead of just displaying the div like this, we could actually use what we learned in the previous episode and create a component for the user. We could come over here and just similar to what we did before, if we want to create a component, I can just call it, for example, user, and it's just a function, a normal function in React that returns some sort of JSX. Now, what JSX are we going to return? Well, we're going to return this div, which includes both a username and age, right? Now, that information we're going to grab from the props. If you recall, that's what we usually do when we have components. So instead of saying user.name, we say props.name and props.age. Now, how exactly are we going to grab the name and the age from props? Well, now instead of saying that we're returning a div for each of the elements in the user's array, we're going to be returning the user component. And the user component will now have a name prop, which its value will be user.name. And it will have an age prop, which its value is going to be user.age. And you can see that it looks a lot cleaner if we do something like this. And it still works, right? It works perfectly. And we're using what we learned in the previous episode of using a component to make our code look better. Now, one thing I didn't mention in the last episode on purpose because I didn't want to make it super complicated right in the beginning is the fact that normally when you are creating new components, you're not putting all of them into a single file like I'm doing over here. The reason for that is because you don't want to have a file with like 1,000 lines of code, right? You usually create different files for different components. I'm going to go over more about project structure later on in the course, but for now, just know that when you're going to create a new component, you should be creating a file for it. So let's create this file called user.js, which is going to contain the user component. So all we have to do is we just have to copy this user component over here and literally just paste it over here. Now, how are we going to access this inside of the app.js? Because right now we are calling the user component, but it's breaking because it doesn't know what user is because user exists in a different file. So the way we do this is we just export this component in this file. And in our app.js at the top, we'll just say import from, and we put the path towards that component, which is in the user file, just like this, because the user file is over here. And we just grab the user component like this. And if we save this, now it should be working like before, but instead of having everything in the same file, it now exists inside of a different file. I like doing this way. It makes code look easier and better. And yeah, it's just the standard pattern in React. So this is basically it for this video. I know this is actually a lot of information, and I thought about making my videos into really small videos, one for each topic, but I don't like that idea. I don't personally love that. I like videos where you're able to work with a lot of stuff, but at the same time, I don't want to overcomplicate each video. So the middle ground is making this medium length videos for each episode where I go over a few different topics which are kind of related to each other. So let me know what you think. I'm gonna give you guys some exercises at the end of this video right now, so you can practice on your own. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section. And yeah, that's basically it. So let's get into the exercise. Okay, so for the exercise, what I want you guys to do is I have this list of planets over here. It doesn't include all of the planets in our solar system, but it's just a section of it that I wanted to show you guys. But basically, what I want you guys to do is I want you guys to write code for looping through each of these planets and displaying their names, just their names. But for each of those planets, I only want you to display their names if they are a gas planet. So if you guys don't know, only I think 4 planets are gas planets, and some of them are over here, right? 3 of them are over here. And I want you guys to display only the gas planets names over here, right, as a list. So how you should do this? Well, just do exactly how we did before. Loop through this list, then use ternary operators, which we learned in the beginning of this video, in order to decide which ones you should show and which ones you shouldn't. And then if you want, you can also make them into a component, right? Make the planets into a component and just make everything that we've learned previously into a single piece of code, right? So the code for all of this will be in the description, but I'll put this even over here, like right over here. I'll call this planets.js because the code for all of this will be in the description, right? So you can just check it out. But if you guys want to use this before you see the actual solution for this problem, you can just come to the planets.js file and it will be over there. But work on this and come back whenever you're done because I'm going to show the solution right now. Okay, so this is the solution for this exercise. It's pretty simple, as you can see. We just loop through each of the planets, and for each planet, we just ask, okay, if the planet.is a gas planet is true, then return an h1 tag displaying the name of the planet. And as you can see, this is exactly what happens in our screen. However, if we want to use ternary operators to do this instead, it would actually look a lot better. We don't even need to use this return over here, and we don't need to use an if statement. Instead of using this curly braces, we can actually just return directly some JSX right after the arrow function. So this is equally valid, as you can see over here. This code over here is equally correct. Instead of actually putting curly braces and saying return, we can actually just return like this. And instead of using an if statement, we could just use something like a ternary operator, right? We can say if the planet.is gas planet, then display this, right? Something like this. And this would still work, as you can see. It still only displays the correct information. We could do the opposite as well. We can say if it's not a gas planet, then display the name, and you can see the other 3 planets that are not gas planets will be displayed in our screen. So that's basically it for this video. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like down below and comment what you want to see next. Subscribe because I'm posting probably 3 times a week for this course, and I would massively appreciate it. And yeah, that's basically it. Really hope you guys enjoyed it, and I see you guys next time.